Socialist key thinker number 5 is Anthony Giddens, a sociologist best known for being an advisor to Gordon Brown and Tony Blair and the new Labour Party in the 1990s. Before we talk about Anthony Giddens and his view of socialism, let's look at the context in which he was advising those two individuals and the election of 1997. Okay, let's talk about the election of 1997. First of all, let's talk about how Labour prepared for it. In 1994, Tony Blair had become the leader of the Labour Party. Gordon Brown was the shadow chancellor of the Exchequer. And they had an agreement that when Tony Blair retired or left politics, Gordon Brown would become the next Prime Minister. That does happen, but Gordon Brown has to wait 11 years for it. Two changes that Tony Blair makes, as well as being a relatively young politician, bringing a fresh approach. The Labour Party gets a new logo, which you can see there, and also scraps Clause 4, which was a commitment to a fully nationalised economy. Now remember, key thinker number 3, Beatrice Webb, helped to write the Labour Party constitution. No Labour Party government from 1945 onwards had ever fully committed to Clause 4. It was a symbolic commitment of what the Labour Party stood for and the socialism of the Labour Party. But Tony Blair decides that it's outdated and scraps it. He's going up against a divided government. John Major, his reputation was quite poor after winning the election in 1992. The decision that Britain would leave the exchange rate mechanism in 1992 led to an economic downturn, so the economy wasn't performing very well, and also his personal approval wasn't particularly high either. Spitting Image, a popular satirical cartoon of the time, referred to him as the grey man to suggest that he was boring. And also he lost the support of newspapers like the Sun newspaper, which was huge. So let's look at the result. The Labour Party, on the promise of commitment to better public services, won a landslide victory. When Tony Blair was asked, what are your 3 priorities should you become Prime Minister, his answer was education, education, education. The Labour Party gains 145 seats with 43% of the vote, 418 seats in total. The Conservatives lose 178 seats. Again, like we looked at in the 1945 general election, their seat share more than halves, 31% of the vote. And I've put there a good performance for the Lib Dems in 1997. They double their seat share, more than double it, 17% of the vote. So Labour has a clear mandate to rule. So what does Tony Blair want to do with it? Well, devolution, first of all, putting power in the hands of the people of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to give them more of a say in the politics of their region. There is also a devolution referendum in the North East in 2004, but it fails. Labour Party also signs the UK up to the Human Rights Act to protect human rights. There's also the Freedom of Information Act to increase transparency in British government. He's committed to reducing the number of hereditary peers in the House of Lords. Now, the Labour Party said they were going to get rid of them, and what we end up with, of course, is that 92 of them remain and stayed there ever since. And like I said, Tony Blair was committed to what he called education, education, education. And so let's look at some of the programmes that were introduced. First of all, Every Child Matters. Every Child Matters was a government programme where agencies were required to work together and to communicate more often. So that includes social services, primary and secondary schools, the NHS, and groups like CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. So Every Child Matters was to get groups working together to identify children in need. Next up is Sure Start. And again, that was an intention to make improvements in childcare, particularly in the early years, and to offer health support and family support within local communities. And then finally, the London Challenge for Schools was set up to improve schools in the capital. Tony Blair had famously committed to no primary school classes with more than 30 children in it. So Labour's big push prior to the election was in the area of education, and less so on the impact that the government can have in terms of higher taxation levels. And we'll come on to that when we talk about Anthony Giddens and the economy. Anthony Giddens writes two key texts. First of all, in 1994, he writes Beyond Left and Right. And in that, he says that capitalism is corrosive, and so is individualism. And the areas that are most affected are community and fraternity. So, again, there is this concept, even with key thinker number 5, just like with Marx, that capitalism has a corrosive effect on our human nature, but also for Giddens on society. The problem is, according to Giddens in 1994, capitalism is irreversible. And so rather than to seek to overthrow capitalism, governments must work within it to make it serve as many people as possible. And it's the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And what Giddens is trying to do is to provide socialism within a neoliberal economy. And he gives more information to that in The Third Way in 1997. If you remember Anthony Crossland, key thinker number 4, he was committed to the economics of John Maynard Keynes, who is pictured here, but Giddens argues that Keynesian's economic theories are obsolete. He doesn't believe that Keynes's theories apply to the 21st century economy. So what Giddens argues is that social democrats need to recognise the influence of the free market economy and the ability of the free market to empower individuals economically, to put money in people's pockets. But what Giddens argues in The Third Way in 1997 is that capitalism needs to provide a strong sense of social cohesion, a strong sense of community. And so what Giddens tries to do is marry up the neoliberal economy with a socialist view of society. And that's because in a globalist economy, trying to manage the economy doesn't work, and that's why Keynes's ideas are obsolete, according to Giddens. Giddens looks at the economy and he calls it post-Fordist capitalism. And what Giddens means is that, like Henry Ford's car factory in Detroit and elsewhere, old school capitalism, when we're looking at the sort of the late 19th, earliest 20th century capitalism, provided industries within a community. And those traditional industries were so important to those communities. So if you look at Bolton, it's the textile industries. And families and communities worked together within that industry. And the economy, that localised economy, led to a strong sense of community and society. In a post-Fordist capitalist world, according to Giddens, that's no longer there. So there is a loss of community, a loss of a social identity and class support for one another, and individuals could be left feeling alienated. But neoliberal capitalism was liberating. It was here to stay, it wasn't going anywhere, and it could liberate individuals. It allowed people to pursue their individual identity and to do what they wanted to do within their own lives. That came at a cost because society was less cohesive and there was this feeling of a loss of community. So individuals feel less secure and more influenced, therefore, by cultural and economic elites telling them what they value. So for Giddens, there's an irony to neoliberal capitalism because it's all focused on the individual and is supposed to be liberating, but at the same time, it can leave people afraid and unable to pursue their individuality. Because in a less secure world where people don't have that sense of community and therefore a real sense of self, cultural and economic elites, like, I don't know, for example, the dominant media news in the newspapers, can sort of impress values upon people and tell them what they value. And so, for Giddens, the state can help human nature flourish by doing the following. Number one, retreat from economic management. So here is a big change from Key Thinkers 3 and 4. Remember that Crossland was committed to a managed economy in the name of John Maynard Keynes. Beatrice Webb, key thinker number 3, believed that the management of the economy would grow over time and lead eventually to a fully state-controlled economy. For Giddens, what socialists need to do is embrace the neoliberal globalist economy. And by retreating from economic management, the government can put its focus elsewhere. And that is investing in infrastructure, spending more money on public transport, schools and community services to give people a sense of community and a route out of poverty. He also believed that these responsibilities should be devolved regionally, again, to give people that sense of community. Now, for Giddens, inequality of outcome in a free market economy is okay, as long as it leads to greater equality of opportunity. So if we have an economy that results in inequality of outcome, that's fine as long as the government uses tax money in an attempt to provide greater equality of opportunity for the less well off. And quite famously, quite a significant Labour Party politician, Peter Mandelson, quite famously said, "We don't care if you're filthy rich as long as you pay your taxes." So the idea of New Labour, as inspired by Anthony Giddens, is embrace the free market economy, allow those at the top of society to make as much wealth as they can. However, that tax money that is then collected should be reinvested into those with the least. And that is in terms of public infrastructure, public spending, not government control of the economy, but greater public spending in the economy to serve those with the least. Okay, so let's recap. Human nature. Anthony Giddens argues that, yes, like many other socialist key thinkers, capitalism is corrosive. It has a negative impact on our human nature. And so is individualism, because it damages our sense of community and fraternity. Remember, though, that for Giddens, these concepts, free market capitalism and an individual society or an individualistic society, those things are irreversible. They cannot be reversed, and the government shouldn't aim to change them. What the government should do is make the best of the situation. Economics. Remember that Giddens rejects Keynesian economics. One thing that people tend to do is they tend to struggle identifying the differences between Crossland and Giddens, but on the economy, they're very different. So, whereas Crossland embraces Keynesianism, Giddens argues that Keynesianism is obsolete. You cannot manage a state economy in a globalised economy. So when countries are working together interdependently across the world, it is impossible and not productive to try and manage a state's economy. Instead, the free market should be embraced, but that the money that comes from it in the good times must be invested in the least well off. So embrace the free market, and a well-performing economy, free market economy, will mean that people pay more tax, because if they're earning more, progressive taxation means that they will pay more into the state, and then it's the state's role to redistribute that in the form of public spending, not in terms of greater state control of the economy, greater public spending. That takes us on to the state, and like we said, Giddens' idea of the state was that it can be more involved in the role of society and the individual, but the state mustn't impress upon its people control or management of the economy. So there can be an extension of the state in terms of government programmes, but the government mustn't seek to control the economy. And we looked at those programmes like Sure Start, like Every Child Matters, the focus is on improving the lot of the worst off in society. That takes us very nicely on to the last one, society. Remember that for Giddens, he argues that a free market capitalist economy with a focus on individualism means that society is less cohesive, there is a loss of a sense of community, and the state can reinstate that. They can reinstill that by providing government programmes, particularly with a focus on healthcare and education, but also devolving powers to regional governments in an attempt to make people realise what government can do for them in their community. And the idea of those government programmes and of devolution is to give people a sense of community identity, to give people a sense of belonging, and to improve what is a fragmented society.